Hey peeps, I'm James Buckle of Engage Pixel, and when I'm not making indie games, I like to play a little guitar, brew some beer, and make little scale models of hamsters out of paper clips. It's not weird. In this episode of my game Postmortem, I'm going to be talking about the first playable milestone. I'll explain what the milestone is, why it's an important first step in your project, and how the first playable level for Captain Kaon went. If you're looking to start your own indie project, then stick around and I'll share some insights that will help you get started. First playable itself is a vertical slice of the game. It's a level or a part of a level that demonstrates the core features of your game. It acts as a proof of concept to show that your ideas work and that your team can make them. It gives people an idea of what your final game will be like and the confidence that it will be fun. It also gives you something small that you can focus your efforts on. You can iterate through different ideas and changes in a quick and efficient manner until you've figured out exactly what you want your game to be. Often, when you have a publishing deal, it's the first milestone you have to deliver, or it can be part of your pitch when you're trying to get a deal signed in the first place. If you're trying for a successful crowdfunding campaign, you need something playable to put in your trailers to show players and get them interested. To achieve a first playable milestone, you need to decide what the core features of your game will be, design a level that demonstrates those features, and then build it. It's important to remember to keep the design basic, so that it can be completed in a reasonably short amount of time and so that the core gameplay is clear. It's also important to stick to your plan. As you're building it, you will have a bunch of cool new ideas, which is great. Stimulating new ideas is part of the purpose of a first playable, but resist the temptation to start putting them in. Otherwise you won't get your first playable finished. And if you can't finish your first level, you'll never finish your game. Once you have a first version of this level, you can begin honing it and making the best it can be. You can tweak and play around with different ideas, making incremental improvements whilst only working on something small. If you have a dozen levels and you make a change, then you'll have to migrate that change across to all of those levels. If that change doesn't work out, then you've got to go back and you've got to rip it out again. This can be hard to do when you've invested so much time implementing the idea to begin with and have to invest so much more taking it back out again. High levels of personal investment can produce a kind of a mental block that makes you less willing to make changes. There's nothing worse than being personally invested in a bad idea. If you're only working on a single level, then taking something out and putting it back in again is much easier. This mental block is smaller and easier to overcome. The first playable level is small and malleable in a way that the full game is not. Making a first playable level helps you understand what makes your game good and allows you to establish a set of guidelines for level creation. You're able to iterate through a single level faster and test out different ideas to see what works and what doesn't. You can then put this together into a set of guidelines for how the rest of your levels are created. Often the first playable level is made by a small core team. Once the milestone is passed, that team is then expanded to create the full game. By having a set of guidelines to give to new team members, you are better able to get them up to speed and produce good quality content that fits in with the rest of your game. The first playable will also provide your QA team with a testbed and a benchmark to compare to. The level will contain all the features of a game in one place, so if you can play through the level all the way to the end, then you can verify that all your features are working. If you have to test multiple incomplete levels where some features are inaccessible until another part of the level is completed, then a broken feature can easily go unnoticed for some time. Having done a first playable level, you'll be better able to estimate the scope and timescales of your other levels. You can assess how much work it took to create the first level, break it down into the tasks required, and then use that to build a schedule for the remaining levels. This will give you an estimate of how long it will take to make the rest of the game, and then you will know when you'll be able to deliver it and at what cost. Now, there's a fair chance your first playable level won't actually make it into the game. It could be that you draw up a narrative plan of your levels and the first playable doesn't fit in. With every game I've worked on, the first playable has eventually been dropped. With one, it was remade from scratch because the artwork in the first playable was of a lower overall quality than the desired quality level of the final game. It was more time consuming to swap out the artwork and try and make it work than to just start again. so don't get emotionally attached to the first playable level. Once you get to the end and have finished your first playable, then there is one last important thing to remember. You need to determine if it's fun and if it could become a worthwhile game. You need to do some play testing and see if other people enjoy playing it and judge whether it's likely to sell. It's a critical moment when you ask the question, is this a bad game? Because if it is, you need to drop it and move on to your next concept before it costs you a lot of resources. If it looks like the game won't be a success and that players won't want to buy it, then this is your moment to step away and move on, no matter how attached to the game you are. This will be the hardest decision you ever have to make in a project, and this is the critical point when you need to make it. I had to dig around the old hard drive for a while to find the first playable for Captain Kaon. I did it about 4 years ago, and the game has moved on quite a lot since then. Eventually it just became obsolete because there were so many changes that it wouldn't even run anymore. Sometimes it becomes a lot of extra work just to keep a first playable level alive, and when you've got lots of full levels in your game that are more advanced, then it just isn't worth it. Part of making a first playable meant tweaking and balancing, playing with all the little numbers that affect the behaviour of the player's ship and the enemies. Figuring out how to make it fun to control the ship, not so fast that you keep crashing and bouncing off all the walls, but not so slow as to be plodding and dull. In these early days, the game changed dramatically each day. I was also able to figure out some of the factors that affected difficulty. One of the factors I found most directly affected the difficulty in flying your ship was gravity, because it directly impacted your float time, or how quickly you would start falling once you stopped thrusting. This is important because how long you float for affects how quickly you can take evasive actions to avoid dangers. Unfortunately, if you float too much, then it takes too long to actually fall down, and then moving down the level or landing is time consuming and difficult, so I had to get the gravity just right and the mass of the ship just right. The first playable allows you to figure out all of the factors that affect your gameplay and let you decide how to use them. I had the idea of setting the game on different planets and increasing the strength of the gravity the further you got through the game. This seemed like a good idea at the time, but it affected the behaviour of the gunships too much one level from the next, and I decided I wanted more consistent values across all levels, because you want your ship and how it behaves to be the same on one level as it is on the next, otherwise you're just going to start confusing the player. I then created an Android version which I would keep up to date and on my phone at all times. Whenever I went to see some friends or was at a developer social, I would pop it out and get some people to play it. The reactions were positive, and I was able to get some good early player feedback by watching them and seeing how they played the game. This was invaluable both because it let me know that people liked the game and they thought it was fun, but also that when I could see people having problems, it gave me something to go and fix, and the following week I could then bring out the fixed version and see how people played and responded to that. There were enough people that would keep playing the game and seemed to really like it that it gave me an indication that I had some good basic gameplay. The first playable level helped me establish a set of level creation guidelines, things that worked and things that didn't work. I found that negotiating the levels was quite a challenge, and it became much harder once someone was shooting at me. The levels in Captain Kaon are based on a 1:8 square grid, but tunnels of this size are too small for combat. You just don't have the room to move. I determined that I needed to create rooms or areas to fight in that were 256 square in size as a minimum, and then connect them with short tunnels of 1:8 square size. This gave me a clear basic design rule for creating the rest of the levels. I also figured out that I would need a border of at least 3 tiles around the edge of each level. This would ensure there was enough of a buffer to keep the player in the centre of the screen. In GameMaker, you can set a camera to track an object, but when it reaches the edge of the level, the camera will stop and the object will carry on. In the case of the mobile version, I needed to keep the player object in the centre of the screen so it didn't end up hiding under your thumbs. This meant having a minimum buffer of 3 tiles around the edge of each level. This was another simple rule that I could apply to the rest of my levels. Had I not figured this issue out until I'd made several levels, then it would have been a massive amount of work to go back and move everything around. The GameMaker level editors just don't allow you to bulk move tiles and objects in a level several steps across and down. I was able to establish a checklist of basic requirements for running a level for the first time. the minimum I would have to do to ensure that I could get the level to run and it wouldn't immediately fall over when I tried to load it. This is a useful step as it gives you something to check against when you think you've finished a level and you want to play it for the first time. You might think you'll just know, that you'll be able to remember, you'll be able to have a mental checklist and just that you won't need to write it down, but you really can't beat having an actual checklist that you have to tick off. It's far more reliable than your fallible memory. There were times when I would skip the checklist and just go straight to testing the level, and it would immediately fall over because I'd forgotten something basic like a player spawn object. Then I'd fix it and run it again and it'd fall over again because I forgot something else obvious like not turning on the physics. It's easy to do when you're working in haste, but if you have a checklist and you stick to it, then you actually save time by not loading and reloading the game each time you make some silly little mistake. There were a few features in the first playable for Captain Kaon that didn't make it into the final game. I experimented with dropping coins, which is a bit of an old school gameplay mechanic. There were coins around the level for you to collect, some high value ones hidden away for you to search for. They would also be dropped when you destroyed an enemy, and you would have to scramble quickly to collect them. I dropped this feature for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it made the game too chaotic. The screen was just so busy with enemies to fight and coins spinning around that it made your eyeballs bleed. But it also didn't really fit in with the style of the game and the feel I was going for. This isn't a cutesy arcade game, even though it has pixel art graphics. The player needed to be focused on shooting bad guys and completing missions, not flying around collecting coins. The other feature was water. You could splash into it and fly around with the buoyancy pushing you to the surface. It kind of flipped the gravity mechanic on its head. I didn't specifically drop this feature. I had originally planned to use it in the Earth and Europa levels that would feature later in the game, but these levels were then dropped because I ran out of time and money, so the water feature went with them. So that's the story of Captain Kaon's first playable level. I hope it's given you some ideas of what you should be doing when you make your own game and how important it is to get a solid first playable level before you crack on with everything else. If you have any questions, then ask them below and I'll try to answer as best as I can. If this video was helpful, if you enjoyed it, then it would be great if you could give it a like. If you have any friends that you think might be interested as well, then if you share it with them, that would be awesome. If you want to support this channel and this video series, then pop over to Steam and pick up a copy of Captain Kaon. All proceeds go towards me, making another game and more videos and eating. The next episode in this game Postmortem series I'll be talking about second-to-second gameplay and why we define gameplay in time periods. So hit subscribe and follow my channel to see it. Until then, enjoy playing games and I'll see you next time. Let it get in focus. You in focus? The first playable... That's straight back, come on now. It's a level or part of level that then demonstrates... The first playable level is small and manual in a way that the full game is not. Manual? Okay, one more take because I think I'm manual. Gah, gah, gah.